It begins with a photograph, at first glance a simple tintype from the 1850s, a barn in Virginia, blurred figures at its edge, but look closer, the bodies of women, lined up in front, stare hollow-eyed into the lens. Behind them, shadowed men, not husbands, not brothers, owners, breeders. This image, archived under an innocuous label, Southern Farmstead 1857, was quietly pulled from public view by the Library of Congress in the 1920s. No reason given, but researchers who saw it spoke of something worse than labor camps, worse than whipping posts. They whispered of the breeding farms. By the time slavery became an economic machine, reproduction itself had been weaponized. Entire farms existed, not to grow tobacco, not to raise cotton, but to breed human beings. Women were forced into pregnancies again and again, their children sold like harvest. Men were chosen not for their will but their bodies. And in the dark of barns, new lives were conceived not from love but command. Official histories reduce it to economics. Records sanitize it as natural increase. But survivors, rare silenced voices, spoke of children torn away, women chained in birthing stalls, men ordered to violate their own kin. This was not agriculture. This was a human factory, an industry of flesh. And yet, there is a deeper silence. Certain names vanish from census rolls, farms erased from maps, local churches that refused to bury the stillborn, rumors of entire bloodlines erased, of stock families bred until their lineage grew too strange, too monstrous to be sold. It is said that some of those lineages never ended, that in small towns across Virginia, North Carolina, Kentucky, descendants still walk, carrying memories their minds cannot explain, born of farms never meant to exist. The truth was not destroyed, it was hidden, and tonight, we unearth it. The plantation is always depicted with rows of cotton, its white buds glistening like snow. But on certain lands, the rows were different. Rows of cabins, rows of cribs, rows of bodies. Here, the crop was not cotton but children. The economics were simple and monstrous. After 1808, when the international slave trade was officially abolished in America, enslaved labor could no longer be imported. Demand remained, cotton expanded west, sugar and tobacco devoured lives. The South needed labor, and with borders closed, the only way forward was inward, to breed their own supply. In these farms, men became studs, valued not for humanity but for muscle. Women, often in their teens, were kept perpetually pregnant, sometimes forced to bear a dozen or more children. Infants not intended to survive were quietly buried in unmarked pits. The rest, those strong enough, were marched to auction blocks. The farms became assembly lines, each generation feeding the next cycle of bondage. Plantation owners defended it as natural increase. But reports exist, whispers in letters, unsent journal entries, testimony passed down orally, that reveal the mechanics were anything but natural. Men ordered to father children against their will, women whipped until they submitted, and in the cruelest accounts, children of incest, forced unions between cousins, even between father and daughter, bred for purity of stock. These were not exceptions. They were institutions, yet schoolbooks never mention them, museums rarely display them, and the silence is not accidental. It is a silence maintained by families who profited, churches that blessed it, towns that grew wealthy from the auctions. When we say America was built on slavery, this is the part buried deepest beneath the foundation. Picture a long, low barn. No windows, only a single iron latch on the outside. Inside, straw floors soaked dark with fluids. Birth, blood, milk. Here, the enslaved women were kept in cycles of waiting, waiting for conception, waiting for childbirth, waiting for the children to be carried away. Survivors described the barn as unbearably quiet. Not because there was no sound, there were screams, sobs, the moans of labor, but because no one outside acknowledged it. Field hands walked by without glancing. Overseers ignored it as routine. It was a barn of silence, a chamber where human life was reduced to inventory. One letter hidden in the papers of a Richmond merchant described an overseer recording births like livestock. One female sound, one male weak to be drowned. The language chills because of its bluntness. It was not grief, not even cruelty, it was management, and yet something seeped from those barns that numbers cannot contain. Local folklore tells of nights when travelers heard cries echoing across the fields, though no women were visible. Others spoke of infants' wails carried on the wind, vanishing at dawn. Some say those barns remain haunted, not by ghosts of vengeance, but by memories so heavy that the wood itself absorbed them. On every breeding farm there was a figure known only by one title, the stockman. He was not an owner nor a slave. He was an intermediary chosen for strength, cruelty, and obedience. His job was to enforce reproduction. The stockman selected men and women for pairing, sometimes at random, sometimes according to orders. If a woman resisted, he beat her until she complied. If a man refused, he was whipped until broken. In some accounts, the stockman himself carried out the act, ensuring conception by force. In one oral history recorded in the 1930s, an elderly woman whispered, "He was the devil of that place, tall with one dead eye. When he came, we knew it was time. We prayed for barrenness. We prayed for death." The stockman rarely appears in written archives, but fragments suggest he was feared even by white owners. Some plantations employed more than one, often outsiders, drifters, men with no family ties. Their names vanish from records after a decade, as if deliberately erased. But descendants in rural Virginia still tell stories of pale-eyed men with uncanny strength, born from nowhere, dying without kin. The stockman was not just a man. He became a symbol of enforced corruption, a human weapon forged to desecrate the most intimate bonds. If you search today for breeding farms, you will find almost nothing. A few academic articles, scattered references, no preserved sites, no official monuments, but maps from the 1008. Hundreds tell another story. Travelers marked certain regions, especially between Richmond and Washington and across eastern Virginia, as nurseries. The word seems innocent, but in coded correspondence between traders, nursery meant a farm designed to breed enslaved people for sale further south. One such map was discovered in 1911 in a church basement in Caroline County. The counties were marked with small red circles, each circle representing a known nursery. There were over 30, yet when local historians tried to publish the finding, the document disappeared. The church claimed it was lost in a fire. No fire was ever recorded that year. Why erase it? Because these farms did not vanish with abolition. After 1865, many were converted, quietly, into poorhouses, orphanages, even reform schools. Their barns demolished, their records burned, but the land remembers. Old foundations unearthed in farm fields reveal strange layouts, rooms with no windows, deep pits lined with stones, narrow iron rings bolted to walls. To this day, counties that once thrived on these farms resist inquiries. Locals shrug, deny, or warn researchers not to dig too deep. It is as if the entire region guards a wound it cannot admit to bearing. Imagine a woman stripped of her very identity. On breeding farms, names were often erased. Women were referred to as breeders, their individuality reduced to numbers in ledgers. Some were branded with marks not of ownership, but of fertility cycles, slashes carved into wood to measure their pregnancies, like tallies on a prison wall. In one preserved journal from a Methodist minister, he writes, "The women did not speak their true names. They whispered them only in sleep. By day they were stock. By night they dreamed of themselves." He later confessed that he burned the pages out of shame. The loss of names was more than cruelty, it was erasure. A mother without a name gives birth to children without memory, and in this forgetting lies the horror. Entire lineages exist today with no knowledge of who their foremothers were, only fragments of stories, a cabin, a barn, a cry. Some say the women refused names to spite their captors, believing that if their essence was kept secret, some part of them would remain free. Others believe they whispered their names into the ears of infants, seeds of identity buried deep, waiting to awaken generations later. One of the most chilling features of breeding farms was not the birth itself, but the auction. Infants, once weaned, were lined up in baskets or displayed on tables. Buyers inspected them like produce. Records show children sold in lots, sometimes cheaper by the dozen. Survivors told of mothers clinging to babies only to have them ripped away, their cries drowned by overseers' shouts. A man named Josiah Henson, whose testimony later inspired Uncle Tom's Cabin, described the sight of babes laid on cold wood, their mothers silenced with the whip. The auctions were theater, white families attended as if to a fair. Music played, wine flowed, behind the laughter lives were torn apart. For every sale there was an absence, a hollow in a mother's arms, a rupture in lineage. Whispers persist of one notorious sale in Richmond in 1849 where 100 children were sold in a single day. A local legend claims the church bells rang in celebration, though parishioners swore afterward they never rang at all. Some say it was not bells but screams. Religion wrapped these atrocities in a cloak of legitimacy. Southern pastors twisted scripture to claim that bondage was God's design, and procreation under force a fulfillment of duty. Churches often stood beside breeding farms, their bells chiming over barns of pain. But silence was complicity. Baptisms were denied to children born of incest. Funerals were withheld from stillborn infants. Priests looked away as mothers wept. One chilling document reveals a letter from a Virginia bishop in 1836. These births are not to be sanctified, for they are commerce, not covenant. Commerce, not covenant. In those words lies the rot of institutional faith, a betrayal of its own creed. Yet some enslaved women whispered prayers into the straw, creating secret liturgies that defied their captors. They baptized their children themselves with tears and breast milk, mocking them in the eyes of a God who was not the church's God, but one who listened in silence. Census records from the mid-1800s reveal something strange. Small towns near major breeding centers appear for one decade, then vanish in the next. No fires, no wars, no plagues, just absence. Oral traditions suggest these towns dissolved because of shame. Families who profited from breeding fled when whispers grew too loud. In some cases, towns buried entire graveyards, plowing fields over the dead. Children born of breeding farms often ended up in these towns' orphanages, growing into adults with no origins, no past. Local legends tell of cursed places, town squares where laughter never lingers, churches where bells cracked, cemeteries where no grass grows. Some say the soil rejected the lies buried within it. Others say those towns never truly disappeared, but shifted into something unseen, places where history itself refuses to settle. In 1892, a farmer in Maryland found a leather-bound ledger hidden in the wall of a barn. Its pages, rotted with mildew, listed names, hundreds of them, not owners but children. Each entry noted birth date, parentage, and sale price. The ledger's most haunting feature was its abrupt end. The final page contained no names, only a line scrawled in black, too many to count, too many to write. The farmer brought the ledger to local authorities. It vanished within weeks. Only a single page survives, photographed by a librarian who swore she heard voices whispering when she turned the paper. Names chanted over and over as if demanding to be remembered. Medicine played a role in the breeding farms. Doctors were hired to ensure fertility, to monitor pregnancies, to keep women alive just long enough to birth again. They experimented with methods to induce conception, force labor, or sterilize those deemed unfit. One physician, Dr. Alastair Green of North Carolina, left behind notes describing women opened like livestock, their bodies measured and weighed. He recorded birth rates like scientific data, detached from the screams behind them. It is whispered that some doctors pursued darker interests, breeding not for strength or labor but for traits of the mind. Tall tales circulate of attempts to engineer obedience, to strip the will itself from bloodlines. Whether true or not, the legacy of medical complicity remains undeniable. In certain Southern families, children were born with uncanny trait, size too pale, limbs too long, voices that carried strange echoes. Locals whispered these were descendants of incestuous unions forced on breeding farms. Some lineages, marked by deformities or madness, were quietly erased from records. Folklore speaks of the tainted onesie, children who did not cry, women who could not die in childbirth, men who walked barefoot on frozen ground without harm. Whether myth or memory, the idea of cursed bloodlines haunted communities. In one Kentucky county, entire generations were said to vanish into asylums. In another, descendants bore uncanny resemblances to men long dead, the stockmen reborn again and again. After emancipation, one breeding farm was converted into an orphanage. Officially, it housed children left destitute by war, but local records hint at something darker. Infants too young to be war orphans, children appearing in numbers greater than any census recorded. Visitors described the orphanage as unnervingly silent. Children stared with hollow eyes, never speaking, as if their language had been erased. Nurses whispered that the building itself resisted joy. Lullabies turned sour. Toys broke in their hands. Candles blew out without wind. When the orphanage burned in 1878, no bodies were found. Witnesses swore they saw children walking calmly into the woods, never returning. To this day, locals avoid that forest. They say you can still hear children laughing, then crying, then falling silent all at once. An artifact rumored to exist among collectors, a Bible used by an auctioneer who specialized in selling children. Within its pages, no scripture remained, only names written over psalms, sale prices scrawled over verses of hope. The story goes that the auctioneer on his deathbed tried to burn the book, but the fire refused it. The Bible passed through generations, each inheritor suffering strange fates, madness, suicide, disappearance. Some claim the book still exists, hidden in a private library, its pages warm to the touch, as if pulsing with the lives once sold. In many former breeding regions, locals speak of phantom bells. They ring at night, though no church tower stands nearby. Some say they are echoes of auction bells, summoning buyers. Others say they are funeral tolls for the nameless dead. Travelers have reported waking in rural hotels to hear the bells, only to find clocks stopped at midnight. Farmers say their livestock shudder when the sound carries on the wind. Whether auditory hallucination or something more, the bells remind us of a commerce that turned human cries into currency. Today, many wealthy Southern families trace their fortunes not to cotton or tobacco, but to unrecorded enterprises. Digging into their genealogies reveals sudden surges of wealth in the mid-1800s, unexplained by land alone. Some historians whisper that breeding farms were the true foundation of these fortunes, but silence persists. Family archives remain sealed. Estates built over burial grounds deny access, and descendants who dare to speak often find themselves ostracized, branded as liars. The secrecy is its own inheritance. In the 1930s, the WPA interviewed formerly enslaved people, recording their stories, but many testimonies never saw the light of day. Files marked inappropriate or too inflammatory were quietly locked away. Whispers say some survivors spoke directly of breeding farms, the barns, the stockmen, the children taken. One fragment recovered from a private archive reads, "They made us into fields, they made our bodies into ground, and they sowed pain." Why were these testimonies silenced? Because truth threatens the myth of America as a nation of progress. Truth unmasks the horror at its roots. Across Virginia and the Carolinas, farmers plow up bones, small bones, too small. Archaeologists explain them away as animal remains, yet locals know. These are the children, infants discarded, denied burial. Entire fields hide beneath them, pits of the unborn, the stillborn, the unsold. No headstones, no prayers, just soil heavy with silence. Some say the ground grows nothing there, no matter how often it is tilled. Others say the crops flourish unnaturally, feeding off what lies beneath. The earth remembers what men tried to forget. Historians who research breeding farms often speak of strange experiences, pages missing from microfilm, photographs blurred, tape recorders that fail. One scholar claimed to see a figure in the reflection of glass cases, a tall man with one dead eye, watching silently. The past resists exposure. It is not history alone, it is trauma, alive, refusing to stay buried. To look too closely is to risk being seen in return. The breeding farms may have closed with emancipation, but their legacy lingers in bloodlines, in silence, in shame. Entire generations live without knowing why madness, despair, or violence follows their families. Churches sit on land where barns once stood. Orphanages hide walls that once echoed with mothers' cries. This is not just history, it is inheritance. An inheritance of trauma, of secrecy, of horror passed through centuries. America was not only built on the labor of the enslaved, it was built on their wombs, their stolen children, their broken lineages. And somewhere in barns now rotted to earth, the cries still linger. They are not ghosts, they are memories too heavy to die. The truth of breeding farms was buried, but what is buried does not stay silent.